Welcome everyone to our panel, a look back at the memoirs of a geek. I am Damien DiCarlo, and I will be moderating. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Eisner-nominated comic book publishing company with nominated works such as the graphic novel Kinsey, and happen to be very good friends of mine. Please welcome Barbara and Brian Dillon.
Hi, Damien.
How's it going?
Good to talk with you again.
Absolutely, always fun. Our next panelist is one of great talent and insight into the world of Star Wars. His works include Star Wars: A New Hope and Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. He worked as a visual director and has published his book, Star Wars Memories, My Time in the Death Star Trenches. Please welcome Craig Miller.
Hi.
Well, thank you all for joining me. This is fun. No matter what's going on in the world, I hope we're all safe during quarantine during this pandemic. Craig, I didn't get a chance to ask you where you're from. Where do you currently live?
I'm from and I currently live in Los Angeles. I was born here.
Okay. Yeah, I had a feeling you might have been an LA guy just from what I was reading in your book. And I didn't catch exactly if that's where you currently are, but
still here.
Yeah, that's good. It's one of those things when you live in LA, it's kind of hard to leave once you start in the entertainment industry. So,
Yeah.
So right off, I'll say you have the perfect place here in this panel, Craig, looking back at episodes 4 and 5 of Star Wars. Can you tell us, looking back from your experience a little bit, what your position was on set, first of all?
Well, my title was Director of Fan Relations, but I was a publicist. Primarily, the general description would be publicist, but I was a writer for Lucasfilm. I produced special projects like episodes of Sesame Street with R2 and 3PO on them, and just did all kinds of things. I spent about 5 weeks on the Empire set in my role as a publicist, doing a lot of interviews, getting a lot of background information, sorting through literally thousands of photos and slides that were taken during the production to see what we could use for different purposes.
What kind of purposes would that be? Would that be just marketing, or would it be producing collectibles, things like that? Is that?
Not so much the collectibles, although there was a little of that, but it was really the marketing. What did we want to put in the press kit? What would we use? What would I be using when I went out to the science fiction and comic conventions for presentations? What would we be sending out to Starlog or general interest magazines like Time or whatever? All that kind of stuff. It was way too early for there to be an internet for us to post stuff on, but it was for that purpose, to see what we liked, what worked well, and also to know what we had in case something came up. Because sometimes you'll find a magazine or a TV show wants to do a particular focus. We want to do something about, Harrison Ford being silly, or, Carrie Fisher being beautiful, or something's less kind of silly than that, but, very focused. And so it's good to know what there is.
Right. And I would say that a lot of a result of this has been great product placement, great marketing for children when Star Wars first was introduced in theaters. What kind of, Brian and Dylan, what kind of nostalgic memories do you have with Star Wars, as far as what you collected or what you owned, that you cherish memories of the franchise?
Yes, sir.
You want to start?
Yeah.
What I have memory of, funny enough, is Star Wars for me. I was one of those kids, I think, because of when I was born, which is 82. So already 2 sequels into the world, and so Return of the Jedi I have vague memories of, but it was like Star Wars. It's hard to track back through my memories, like, oh, this is when Star Wars entered my life. It just seems to have always been present. And so one part of that is, and I think other kids experience this, I had a cousin, an older cousin, who collected all the figures through the A New Hope and Empire. And as he aged out of them, his mother offered them to my mom. It was like, hey, if Bryant wants to play with all these, we can let you borrow them for a few years, and I want them back, but you can play with them. And so I remember being gifted, for a few years, all these classic Star Wars figures, and sort of
Did you have to give them back?
I did have to give them back. I had my own, but they did come calling eventually. And there were a lot of great ones in there. I had like an AT-AT walker, and I think a Rebel transport and things like that, a Tauntaun. But I think that was really a unique experience. I can't think of any other beloved toys that were sort of like passed between family members in that way. And I think Star Wars was so so iconic, or so much a hit for kids of every kind, that you could do something like that.
Absolutely. Just going off of my own memory, you just triggered a memory of mine. I had only just a few Star Wars toys. I didn't have like a lot, and the reason for that, I think it was just that not that I liked Star Wars any less than the rest of the things I was into. I think what happened was I had the few choice figures that I wanted, and I felt like there was just too many to buy. So I ended up just going with just the main ones. I had my Luke, my Vader, my Leia, Han Solo, and just a few other ones here and there, obscure ones. And I just remember using the rest of my time with those figures and my toys was to just go off of imagination. So I didn't really need the whole collection to have a good time. So it trained me to start using my imagination more, to be creative, because Star Wars had such a large catalog of merchandise. I can see how it would be overwhelming for someone to collect everything. And Craig, I got to ask you, as far as collectibles, do you have any favorites? Did you keep anything from set, or anything that you cherish very much?
Well, I wish I was much more dishonest than I was, because there was an awful lot of stuff I would have liked to have taken home, but I never did. I have a lot of posters and movie one sheets, that sort of thing. My favorite things are, well, I have a bunch of photos. You can see some of them up on my office wall there.
Wow.
From the film. Some I'm in, some are just other people I worked with. I designed the original poster for the official Star Wars fan club, the McQuarrie painting. So while I didn't get to keep the original painting, I do have one of those on my wall. And I suppose the biggest thing I have, although it's small, is Gary Kurtz gave me one of the Snowspeeder miniatures from Empire Strikes Back, which I have in a plexiglass box in my office.
That's so cool, Craig.
That is so, ridiculous.
He's got Bryant very excited with the collectible. Now, as far as your collecting, do you collect? Do you still collect Star Wars, Craig?
Well, not, I more accumulate than collect. There's not like any real pattern or completism to it. I still have lots of my stuff. I've started getting rid of some of it. I've been overwhelmed with how full my house is after 40 some years in the movie business and television business, that I've started culling through it and getting rid of a lot of stuff that no longer is as important to me, or like I just sent off to Prop Store, the auction house, several boxes of stuff, not all from the Star Wars movies, but from different films. Hundreds of slides and 8x10s from Star Wars and The Dark Crystal and Return to Oz and other movies that they'll be auctioning. They're wonderful things, and I really enjoyed dealing with them, but they've been sitting in a file cabinet for 25 years, so I figure they should go to someone who would do something with them.
Sure.
Yeah. And as far as the collecting, do you, or I should say accumulating, do you ever feel the need to, or I could just imagine around Christmas time, you just, hey, here's a new collectible for you. You know, you just have plenty to give out. Do you want to give out most of what you don't use or care for anymore? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, not, it depends on what it is. You know, I'm not crazy, so, you know, I'm not giving away a $5,000 item. Those are like some of the posters and that sort of thing. Those are going off to prop store. But yeah, I mean, years ago, before they were super valuable, I used to give people like the D-style Star Wars one sheets and stuff like that as gifts and that sort of thing. I remember wrapping gifts in Superman one sheets. You know, it's like
wow.
I had over 100 of them in my house. So it's like I got to do something with these.
Sure.
Right.
But some other stuff gets given away. Not all of it Star Wars. A lot recently, I've given people a lot of books that I bought for myself, but just don't feel the need to keep anymore. Barbara and Brian just got a couple of
We
them.
did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig.
So you're just a giving person.
He is. He
I
very
knew
much
that
is.
about you already. Now, with your, I'm sure with a lot of what you say accumulated over the time, I'm sure there's a lot of nostalgia to that, or just sentimental
sure.
value.
Yeah, and the stuff that has sentimental value, I keep. You know, I'm not going to get rid of those pieces. I mean, it would have to be a very bad time for me to sell the snow speeder. I don't know what it would go for, many thousands of dollars, but it was a gift from Gary, who was a good friend and who I worked with for over 40 years on lots of different movie projects. You know, things like that. That's got more sentimental value to me than the cash value. It's just
Sure.
the things that, it's even like the movie one sheets that I'm going to be selling. I'm keeping singles. I'm not, but I have duplicates of the Chaikin poster or the birthday poster or things like that. So they're significantly valuable, but do I really need 3 of them? You know, so better to give them to people who, or to sell them in some cases to
There you go.
people who will also appreciate them and get them out of a flat file.
Right.
Right. Now, let's talk a little bit about, let's turn back the time here to 1977. And I assume you were at a screening before the actual opening premiere of A New Hope back in 1977.
Yeah.
What was that screening like for you when you first saw this film?
Well, prior to Star Wars opening, I was a consultant to Lucasfilm for a few months, well, I guess for 8-9 months, on marketing to fans and conventions and dealing with fanzines and all that kind of stuff. I hadn't been to the set, so I didn't have the kind of deep relationship I had after Star Wars opened and I was brought on full time. But I still was familiar with it. I'd seen a lot of photos. I knew the story. So I sat in a room at 20th Century Fox, and I was, you know, like a lot of people before Star Wars came out, it was, this sounds really good. Can they really make a movie this good? Especially since in the 70s, science fiction movies were mostly terrible. There weren't a lot of really good ones. So I sat there, and I think like a lot of people, the movie opened, there was the opening crawl, and then the first 2 ships come in, and the Star Destroyer, the blockade runner, and it's like, that's cool, that looks good. And the Star Destroyer comes in and comes in and comes in, and it's just like, oh my God, this is the movie I've always wanted to see.
Just
So,
that opening alone.
yeah. And Richard Edlund said that he knew that because it was the opening shot, this was going to sell the movie to the audiences, and he had to be sure it was great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it was. I mean, I I know an awful lot of people who've said essentially the same thing. That opening shot just pulled them in, and they, the movie had them from there on.
Yeah, absolutely. You had two very unique pulls within the first 10 minutes. If you think about it, you had the crawl of the story, the prologue of what's happening. And then you have the Star Destroyer coming in the most impressive manner, which is not a quick zoom. It's a very slow, ongoing process of it being revealed to be a large vessel. And you had John Williams' score opening. Yeah. I mean, it had all the right ingredients within the first 10 minutes of it to pull you in. Now, what I'd like to know is, I got your thoughts of what you thought of it when you first saw it. Do you remember the reaction of those around you, whether it be the premiere or those that you might have been friends with, their reaction to the film when you first saw them see this film?
Okay, well, I of course first saw it weeks before the premiere, but the audience I was with reacted, really positively. It's a film that, as I think we all accept, pretty much everyone reacted positively. Not universally, but most people. And, if you're in the right mindset, if you like science fiction, this movie, can't be beat.
Absolutely. And it had all the right elements. Now, my question to you, Barbara and Brian, as consumers buying Star Wars, whether it be the comic books, the the folklore of any sort of comics, of graphic novels, video games, do you have any favorites that did the same thing with the original trilogy? It just made you fall in love with Star Wars all over again, where you've watched something, read something, and it doesn't have to be confined to episodes 4 and 5. I'm just curious to, as a whole, how you feel about it.
Absolutely. So I actually grew up, I had an older brother who was obsessed with Star Wars, and we would have all of the films on repeat in our house, to the point where he would be the dialogue soundtrack of the films. It didn't necessarily engender a love of Star Wars for me when I was very young. Funny enough, it wasn't until the Clone Wars when I actually really truly fell in love with Star Wars, and then went back and revisited the original films and truly fell in love with the entire franchise as a whole. So I really credit the Clone Wars and then Rebels subsequent from that with really renewing my interest in the entire franchise, the characters, the entire story from the very beginning. They're definitely high up.
It pulled you in at a certain point in time of your life, or maybe with your age, where maybe the older films yet didn't quite reach you just yet until you had the one thing to pull you in. Then everything else wrapped it in for you, as far as like the original trilogy, the new stuff. Brian, how about you? Do you have anything to share?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that I tend to be a little more forgiving than a lot of my fellow Star Wars fans that I converse with. But the benefit of that is that I think that while I sort of think of the films as a separate thing and don't expect the ancillary material to exceed it very often, I find that I'm very often surprised with the content that's out there. I have had books that have blown me away. I particularly loved Matthew Stover's adaptation of Episode 3, which just adds a lot to the story. But there are other original books that have, I think, original characters that have moments that hold up with the original trilogy and the rest of the films. I think you find that in the animated series, multiple different animated series that have been produced. I think there have been moments in the comics that have done that, in the video games as well. So I think one thing is, even though, of course, there are points where we can point to, some beats that have been repeated or stories that are weaker, there are so many strong characters and additional stories that have been crafted within this universe that George Lucas and company have put have built that I have faith that they'll be able to do that for a long time going forward, probably well beyond my lifetime.
Craig, did your love of Star Wars continue on after episodes 4 and 5, or did it just stop there for you?
Oh no. I grew up being a science fiction fan and a comic book fan. So I mean that's exactly the kind of stuff I've always loved. And some Star Wars things I've loved more than others. Um, I'm not a big fan of the prequels. I do like uh, I guess the sequels, the third trilogy.
Yeah.
I think they're flawed, but overall I enjoyed them. But I've always been a big fan of everything Star Wars, even after I was out of Lucasfilm.
I don't mean to put you in the spot, but I'm curious what I'm dying to know your opinion as to what may have been flawed, if you want to tell.
I mean, my opinion, what?
What you mentioned that might have been flawed with the most recent
Oh,
trilogy.
you know, I'm so bad remembering which movie is which by title,
Right.
but there's, I think in the second one, we're, we have almost no time. The bad guy ship, the Imperial ship, is going to blow us out of the sky. We've come up with a plan to go onto their ship and try and do something. Wait, let's go to this other planet and try to find someone who we don't know who it is, who may be able to help us. What?
I love this narrative. Is this what's going through your head when you're first watching it then, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what? We have no time, but we can go do this. And while it's sort of a good set piece in and of itself, the only thing I could imagine it being there for was to introduce Benicio del Toro's character so he could have a bigger role in the movie after that, which he didn't. But it set him up to do that just the way Boba Fett had been set up in Empire to be the major villain in Jedi, but he didn't. But I mean, it's like none of that made any sense. Everything that happened could have happened without any of that. And that's like, what, 20 minutes of the movie on that, you know.
It was a long time in that one. And
Yeah. And to me, it's like, okay, that's a flaw. There's no purpose to that 20 minutes being there.
Okay, and I see exactly where you're coming from now. I do agree with you. There are some flaws, I would say. It's interesting because a friend of mine that was on my other podcast, his mother actually worked, was in school with George back in college, and they had. I think what had happened, if I heard the story right, is that he mentioned exactly what he was working on. And I believe she had the opportunity to work on set, and she thought, that sounds like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And so back then, I think it was already frowned upon because, like you mentioned, science fiction movies weren't particularly hits, you know. And so you had very little to work with, and then you had George's vision, and you went on blind faith when you bought your ticket, saying, "Hey, you know, check it out." And it obviously evolved to something very different. But I would say that it's hard to compare when you have the original trilogy to anything else because the bar is raised so high. And I think that while there's nothing really wrong with the new movies or the prequels, I mean, I should retract that. There are some things wrong, but I feel that there's good effort involved. There's always something lacking, and I know that there's something lacking in those films that I feel personally that the original trilogy does not. It does not lack a single thing. And yet I know there's going to be someone a little wiser than me in Hollywood to say, well, there's maybe a few things, you know. With that in mind, I'm dying to ask all of you, our panelists, your opinion, or what is your take on George's special edition versions of episodes 4 and 5 in particular?
We'll start with Craig. What do you think, Craig?
I think for the most part, they don't really add much. Okay, adding an extra dewback in the background on, on Tatooine and stuff like that is fine. And filling out Cloud City in Empire, that's fine. It's not that big a deal. But yeah, it made it look visually more interesting. Some of the other stuff, I don't know that. I think it was either nice but not important, and a couple of things are like, I wouldn't have done that. And certainly all the times we've changed who shot first and how and where they hit and stuff like that, it was fine the first time.
Right.
What was the thing that they have now added with what Greedo says?
Oh,
Says something.
a McClunky.
The clunky, yes. In the
He has
latest.
a new reaction in the Disney
right,
Plus.
right.
In the Disney Plus edits.
They changed it again?
Yeah, apparently it was changed.
Again.
I think not for Disney Plus. It was changed when they were, if you remember, right during the sale to Disney, they were in the process of doing 3D IMAX re-releases of all the originals and the prequels. And so some of these were updated slightly for those releases and were never seen by the public. And now are being seen on Disney Plus, I guess.
I'm aware of the changes they made for the
Yeah.
Blu-ray version, the DVD version. There's been all these small minor ones like the lightsaber being a different color. I researched it once just out of curiosity, and there's just like a lot of little changes. So I don't know if it adds to anything. I know I kind of agree with you, Craig, but well, I'm not against the special editions. But Bryant and Barbara, what are your takes on special edition trilogy?
I don't need the special edition trilogy. I'm absolutely fine with the original unaltered or unedited versions. We are very fortunate to have copies of the unaltered versions, so I think we will certainly cherish those as long as we take good care of them. Do you feel like there's anything that you enjoy?
I do.
Is there really?
Yes. You know what? I'll defend the special edition. I don't agree with a lot of the changes in the special edition, the ones that affect the plot, I will say. Things like, Greedo shooting first or shooting at all. There's a few other, like Hayden Christensen being the appearance of Anakin at the end of the film still doesn't completely make logical sense to me in regards to Anakin's his redemption. But I guess what I try to think of it from George's perspective. Obviously, I imagine he wanted to do some of these changes because he didn't have the means to do them before, or he now was looking at the film through different ways. So I don't mind the special editions as much as I mind not having access to the other editions as well. I think giving access to multiple cuts would be reasonable and is in the hands of Disney, at this point. But the other thing that I think you have to think about is when you look at the history of why these were being re-released at the time, part of it was to re-engage the audience in anticipation of the prequels and to test certain technology because they knew they were working on those prequels, that episode 1 was just a few years from coming out. And for me, even though I didn't know that as a young kid, I got to have what I at least imagined the experience was of seeing the original trilogy in theaters. I remember waiting in midnight lines. I remember the fever around the re-release. And then I also remember being in a theater and like people dressed up and waving lightsabers and this buzz through the audience. I remember just everyone screaming as soon as Star Wars slammed on the screen and like cheering as the Star Destroyer came over our heads, and that was an experience that, at least at that point for my generation, was told to you by people who were there. You had never experienced it. It was just this like, oh my God, there were so many people that wanted to see Star Wars, and lines out the doors, and people were reacting to things they didn't even know on screen, but knew like it was good and this was bad, and we should cheer here and boo and hiss here, and so I do have some love for the special edition because it gave me experiences that I have to carry with me for the rest of my life.
Absolutely. I totally uh, agree with you on that. I had the same exact experience. I think you and I are about the same age, by the way. But yeah, I had the experience of reliving what I thought Star Wars was like in theater, and it still blew me away because I didn't grow up in the time when it was out in theaters yet. So I would say that the special editions were a great way to reignite a new generation that had already seen it before at home on TV, the best that they could with their home theater. Now this is a brand new experience because it had new things in great theaters. I grew up in the LA area, so for me, I saw all three films in the Westwood Village Theater, which was like at the time huge for me as a kid. I just saw that as like the biggest screen you could possibly get in the LA area. And it completely reignited the whole feel. Like you said, the lightsabers where everyone was just waving around. And, I think that's exactly what George needed to have that push to go into episode 1 thinking, great, my audience is still here. I can still do it. Craig, as far as the experience you had on set, now that we're talking about special editions, did George ever mention that he wishes he could have done something that he couldn't do while filming and said, we're limited on, the ability to do this or that, and maybe that's why I led him to go into special edition?
I mean, there's always stuff you wish you could do, but it's not possible. It was going to take too long. It would be too expensive to build, and special effects in the 70s were not what they are today. There wasn't essentially no CGI. Everything was miniatures, and you using an optical printer to print several levels of images onto one piece of film, things like that. So it was a lot more limited. So of course there were things that it's easy to put into a script, much harder to make come onto the screen. So there's always stuff like that. I don't remember ever talking about someday we'll be able to add this to the movie, but there's stuff that couldn't be done or that just didn't work, didn't look right, that sort of thing.
Gotcha. Now, as far as now that you're on the subject of what you saw and said, it seems like you know a lot of Star Wars that us geeks could feed off of. I have a question for all of you, actually, if anyone knows this. I always wondered, why doesn't Chewie get a medal in episode 4 at the very end?
Craig.
Yeah, so Craig
He's a
has
great
it.
guy. He did so much. Come on, give him a medal.
No, it's a question I asked George Lucas. Part of my job was as director of fan relations was with anytime we would get a lot of questions or comments in the same area, I asked George what he thought, what his answer was for it. And I asked him about why Chewie didn't get a medal. What could we tell people? And what he said to me is, Wookiees don't like medals. They think they're wrong. So what they were going to be doing, and this was between Star Wars and Empire, what they were going to be doing was going back to the Wookiee planet for a big celebration. And that ended up being the opening 15 minutes or whatever of the Star Wars holiday special.
Okay, so there was some thought as to these questions, and where they were to address your fan. Is this part of what you did with your fan club? You had to answer these questions.
Well, I didn't have to do anything, but it was something I wanted to do, is respond to the things people had questions about. And so with the official Star Wars fan club, we had the newsletter, and so there'd be articles in it. And I wrote all the issues of the newsletter for the first several years. Articles talking about things like that. why Chewie didn't get a medal, and introducing Boba Fett and with a little, diagram of what all the things on his armor and costume were, things like that. And so I would ask George. He was mostly up in Marin, but and I was working out of our LA offices, but he would spend a lot of time in LA as well. And so when he was there, I would take advantage to ask him any questions that needed answering that only he could answer, or to do an interview with him for the newsletter and the press kit and that sort of thing. And so there are a lot of those kinds of questions that I've asked George, and I have his answers. Some of those answers have changed over time. What he told me about 12 parsecs, for example, is not what happened in Solo. That's a completely different thing. Although it is something I kind of suggested, saying, is it like there's a way of warping space so that 12 parsecs is a much smaller distance than it would have been in normal space? Or, right. But no, he had a very specific answer as to why Han says 12 parsecs.
Now, actually, I kind of want to ask you, what do you think of Solo?
I like Solo. Again, not without flaws, but I enjoyed it. I think there's a little too much fan service in it. Yeah, okay, Howie and Chewie met, that's good. How did he come to the Millennium Falcon? That's good. How Han got his blaster? Did we know that he only had one blaster that had sentimental value?
You only get one, Craig. You only get one.
It comes with
Apparently
his action
so.
figure, Craig. It comes with his action figure.
But I mean, it just seemed like they were explaining too much.
Yeah, I think out of my friends, I love the film personally. I liked it. Some of my friends had a problem with the name Solo.
Yes, I've heard that complaint before as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, another thing I didn't think we needed explained. We just accepted, we didn't have a problem with him being Skywalker. Why would we have a problem with him being Solo?
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Going back to your fan club, I was reading a little bit about it in your book, but I'd like for the audience to know a little bit more about how did that work for a child to sign up for the fan club. This is a day and age where we didn't have internet to look up this kind of thing, and I assume it was advertised in things like comic books, or how did this go about?
Yeah, it was we did mailings, we did advertising in comic books and places like Starlog and that sort of thing, and it had a combination of purposes. One, of course, is to keep up interest in Star Wars so people will keep buying merchandise and be excited about coming to see what would turn into The Empire Strikes Back. But it was also, we kind of felt an obligation to this huge fan base that no one had expected. And I went and interviewed a lot of different companies that were in the fan club and fan mail business. And they represented, rock musicians and movie stars and that sort of thing. And I just didn't like any of their attitude. They were mostly, we'll collect the money, we'll harvest the addresses to send out advertising, and we'll give them the minimum amount of stuff we can give them to keep them satisfied. Badly printed black and white photographs that were more like Xerox copies, and that kind of stuff. And that's not what we wanted to do. So we came up with this continuously revised plan where you paid your $5 and you got an exclusive Ralph McQuarrie full color poster, which I designed and Ralph painted. You got the triangle sticker, that original sticker. You got a color 8x10 and a smaller color photo. You've got a book cover because we knew a lot of kids would be in elementary and high school, junior high school. An embroidered patch, a membership card, all that kind of thing. And we did a newsletter which had the kind of stuff in it I thought I would want to know if I wasn't there and already knew it. Like I said, interviews with George and Mark and Harrison and Irv Kirshner as we got closer to Empire, articles on the special effects, just all kinds of things like that I knew I'd be curious about if I was a fan. And so it was something we really did with, yes, there was a mercenary element to it, but the fan club itself cost us more money than people were paying to be a member. It was something we wanted to do to keep fans interested and to treat them as, as real people, as fans. Most of them were kids, teenagers, college age. So I sort of refrained from saying treating them as adults, but we did do that. I mean, none of it was written down as if they were little kids. It was all stuff to keep them involved and I never knew at the time, because it wasn't like the internet where you get immediate response to everything. But in later years, I would meet people who were members of the fan club who would tell me how excited they were every time a newsletter showed up and how great it was and stuff like that. And that always makes me feel really good.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a really great position to be in. You were making people happy and, directly to love the film even more. Now, as far as collectibles, Craig, whether it be merchandise, toys, where did you have your hand in that?
Well, that was not directly handled by me, and my involvement with merchandising was more peripheral. I didn't make those deals, although there were a few deals that there were people I knew, like Jim Rumpf and those ceramic mugs, the Chewbacca and Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi mugs and the R2 cookie jar. Jim was a friend of mine, and I made arrangements for him to come in and make that deal, but I wasn't the one making licensing deals. But I sometimes worked with our licensees on appearances and promotions, and I was producer for Lucasfilm on some commercials, like if you've ever seen the Underoos commercials for all that underwear, Star Wars underwear, I was producer for Lucasfilm on it and operated R2 in it, things like that.
Barbara, Bryant, I'm curious, now that we're on merchandise, things like that, I know that you have, well, I remember when I recall in your home, a lot of collectibles. Do you have any Star Wars collectibles that are your favorites or anything that you particularly love?
What do you love?
Or it could just be graphic novels if you don't have any figures or anything.
Oh, there's so much stuff, Damien. So much stuff.
And more on the way.
And more on the way. I guess I have three things I think that are my favorite, I would say. We have an Obi-Wan and Anakin action figures that were, are they Gentle Giant?
They're maquettes, yeah.
Maquettes from the Clone Wars, which
Nice.
I really love.
I've always wanted a Darth Maul sideshow that I saw once at a convention. I didn't pull the trigger on it. I think it might have been limited edition, and I never saw it again. So I had to ask, because I'm like, there's certain things I wish I would have gotten, I never did.
Sure.
Exactly. And likewise, I had the chance at that time to buy the Ahsoka one that was like a match set between the three of them, and I didn't, because I was like, I'm sure I could buy that another time. And now it is the hardest maquette
to
buy.
Yeah, Ahsoka is such a popular character.
Yes, and I think the only other thing that's one of my favorites, we have so many, but we have a Syndulla family heirloom that was my big purchase from Galaxy's Edge, which I love Hera. So again, going back to Rebels and the Clone Wars, that's one of my favorite things that I bought.
It seems like a lot of Disney, well, at least particularly Disneyland, when it comes to Star Wars products, they never come around again. I've noticed when I've purchased a few things and I've never seen them unless it's online and sold for like twice as much. So it's a fun thing to collect. I did want to ask you, Barbara and Bryant, as a whole, the Star Wars saga, has it influenced you and your publishing company and what you do with your works and your creativity? Certainly, there has to be some sort of root with us as young ones watching these films and how it affects our geek pop culture now.
Yes, I would say for certain. I think that Barbara and I have, over the last 10 years, I've always been in Star Wars. Barbara's always had a connection, but we've really bonded together over some of the new stories and finding a shared appreciation in it. And I think that what has been revealed to us, maybe we even knew before, but I feel like has become really, really apparent, is how much there are messages that are integral to what Star Wars is. And I think they were placed there by people like George and Gary and Craig. And I think it's at the birth of the project, And there is also something inherent about Star Wars that has to do with families and with parents and children, and being able to share these things together and see certain things at one age, and then totally different things at a different age, and being able to revisit these stories. It's so much like a myth, or a cultural myth, in that way that we can revisit it, and it tells us things about what's going on in our lives and how we should live our lives and what can happen if we fail in certain ways and how to overcome that. And so I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like those are conversations that we continuously have when we're talking about the stories we want to tell, the storytellers that we want to work with, because we enjoy that aspect of it. The last thing I will say is on the recent Disney series where they're covering the making of The Mandalorian, I think it's called Disney Gallery.
Right, we spoke about this.
Yeah, Dave Filoni was speaking to this exact idea, and he talked about George talking to him when he was making The Mandalorian, and how you need to remember to put hope in these stories, because kids are going to be watching these stories, and it's so important to have hope as a young person and to believe in hope. And I think that can be examined in 1,000 different ways, from what it feels like to be a teenager and feel like you're never going to get out of your hometown, to what do you do when you're living under fascist dictatorship? How do you maintain who you are, being a good person, So I've said my piece. I'll let you speak.
I will just echo all of that.
All right, you'll second that one.
Yes.
Craig, I'm dying to talk to you about something that stood out to me in this book, because this was like the first exposure I've ever had with Star Wars. Let's talk a little bit about John Berkey's art. And I know you mentioned this and that you liked it. Tell me how you're a fan.
I'm a big fan of John Berkey. John, for people who don't know, with regard to Star Wars, he did the poster that was included with the LP, the vinyl LP.
That was my first collection.
Of Star Wars. And I love science fiction artwork, being a big science fiction fan. And I was familiar with John's work from all the book covers and stuff he had done. And in the Lucasfilm office, we had about a dozen different comps. Comps are like little 5x7, almost, these are in color, but they're basically color sketches for what the poster might be. And I've always regretted not taking one of those home with me. But there's so much energy in the way he does them. And he had never seen the movie. He hadn't read the script. He'd just been given a lot of artwork and photos of the ships. And that's why in that poster, there's like 5 Millennium Falcons and, all these different things because he didn't know there was only one. So he just put them all over this big space battle sequence. But so is it an accurate depiction of the movie? No.
No.
But but there must have been other ships of that design. It couldn't have been the only one of that design. So
Sure.
it's possible there are more ships like that around. But in any case, it's just a great poster. He's a very talented artist. I'm sorry that's the only association he had with Star Wars, as far as I know. But, it's great stuff.
Yeah, my first round of collectibles when I was really little was I found the soundtracks on LP with his art and the poster inside, and I bought
That's rare finding.
It's very
in
rare.
the used market still having the poster.
I found it at a garage sale that someone sold
wow.
for $5, and I thought I'm gonna buy this because my parents were talking Star Wars. I loved it. I already saw like one of the movies. I was very little, and bought it with my own money. And I started listening to it and loved it. And then I thought, wow, I just kept looking at this art thinking this is so cool. I just stare at that art forever. So for me, John Berkey's art was kind of more of a nostalgic like realm of Star Wars that was in my imagination because I used to look at that art so much.
It's a really great poster.
I think he did art for some of the novels, didn't he?
He might have. It's hard to keep track. He might have done some novel covers. In fact, I think, did he do the Empire cover? I can't remember.
I remember the one
sure.
with the one it's in watercolor. The one, if that's the one you're referring to, right?
Yeah, I just don't remember. But he didn't have a lot of association beyond that. Not like Ralph, who was ubiquitous with Star Wars.
Right.
So now, as far as the difference and change in Star Wars, now they've gone through several different changes. Now Star Wars is owned by Disney. How do we all feel about that?
It's a complex question. How do I feel about it? Well, I really like a lot of what came out of the sequel trilogy. As a woman, and getting to see my first, I mean, I know that there were a lot of female Jedi represented, especially in the extended universe, now legacy universe. But for me, to see a powerful young woman on screen for the first time wielding a lightsaber still brings tears to my eyes. And I remember bawling in the movie theater when I saw that for the first time. So I'm very grateful for that. And there's a lot from most of the sequel movies that I really, really liked. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. And I love that there are things like Resistance and Galaxy's Edge that not only we as longtime fans, but that little ones can really enjoy for the first time, just as you all talked about. Craig got to experience the first generation of Star Wars. We got to experience the second generation, and I can't imagine the excitement of being a young person and seeing their first Star Wars on the big screen. I would imagine that'd be
And that was such a
thrilling.
smart move. I mean, you're tapping on elements of equality, and Star Wars became what it was for us boys, most boys, what it came for you once there were some female characters introduced that you could relate with. I think that just drew in a whole new audience with the new generation. So I think I can understand where you're coming from with now being reignited with your love of Star Wars after Clone Wars, because you started to get to know these new characters that you could relate with.
Absolutely.
Brian, how about you?
I will definitely, I guess I will echo. I feel like Disney has been more positive than negative. I think there's definitely things you can talk about in regards to Disney being a huge corporation and gobbling up all the properties and what negative effects that will have. But I do feel like the approach that we've seen with them with Marvel Studios, which they also acquired, and the storytelling that's going on there had given me the most faith that out of all the studios that they would handle this property with the kind of love that it and attention it needs. And I think while I do have my own, I can, nitpick here and there with some of the films. I enjoy that we have such a variety of Star Wars stories now. I think it'll continue to expand and evolve. And Galaxy's Edge is something I just can't, I don't know how to express it. Like I don't know, for someone like me who grew up like watching Han and Chewie in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon, walking into the cockpit and sitting in those chairs it's a religious experience,
Very, very
it's,
awesome.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. And I mean, that's just one moment in a multitude of things that you can do there. And again, I've heard certain people nitpick or complain about here, and I can agree with certain things. And there are cost prohibitive elements, but there are also moments that they have crafted they're things I could never believe as a Star Wars fan we would be able to experience.
Yeah.
Craig, same question to you. How do you feel about Disney having Star Wars?
I had questions about it when it started, but I've known Kathy Kennedy not well, but I've known her for almost 40 years. I met her, she was Steven's assistant making Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I've seen her career throughout the 40 years, and I had a lot of faith in her and her abilities, and certainly George had faith in her. He had already made her president of Lucasfilm. And so I thought, she would overall do a good job. And I think she has. There is a small but loud segment of Star Wars fandom that hates the sequels and blames Kathy for it, but it's like she didn't do that, and I think she did a good job. And I think these same people were complaining how the prequels had ruined Star Wars and destroyed it. Now they're complaining, and George had done terrible things to Star Wars since he had direct control on the prequels. Now it's like, oh, it should go back to George because Kathy and Disney has ruined Star Wars. It's like the internet has made a lot of people feel like everyone should answer to their whim, I think. There's a lot of, you should make the movie as I see it in my head, rather than I get to like or not like the movie you've made. Again, I don't think the movies Disney has made are perfect, but I think they are more positive than negative. I like Solo. I loved Rogue One. Overall, I like the sequels. The animated stuff has been great. And I think we're going to see, and just like all movies, some of it's going to be better than others.
Sure.
Every movie Warner Brothers makes isn't a classic. So just because it's Star Wars doesn't mean it's going to be great. We would like it to be great, but it's the way making movies happen.
Absolutely. That's exactly how it works in the film industry. Do you happen to know, Craig, or maybe assume why George sold his rights to Disney?
I don't know. I'm not in close contact with George anymore, but from what he said 40 years ago and things he's said now, he was just tired of the responsibility. He didn't want to make more Star Wars movies personally, the time and energy that took. He didn't want to be in charge of this giant company anymore. When I started with Lucasfilm, we were a handful of people, and everyone was trusted to do their job, and we didn't have to go through 12 lawyers and 8 levels of management, that kind of thing. And it's just I think he just decided it was big and unwieldy, and it wasn't what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. I mean, George is in his 70s now, He has things he wants to do, like the art museum. Um, and I think it's just a matter of he's still there on the periphery. He still gives his opinion. He was deeply involved with that big book that came out last year, the archives book. Um, I'd asked him to write something for my book, and he said to me that he was just so burnt out from that book. Plus, he didn't want to open the floodgates of everyone who had ever worked on a Star Wars movie asking him to write something. But he was just burnt out from all the effort that book had taken. Um, so I think that's just it. He was just tired.
Yeah, and that's fair. He's put a lot into it. I had the pleasure of meeting him. I've said this story to Barbara and Bryant, but I was working in Beverly Hills, and he came in to see me for where I was working, and it was a pleasure knowing him. But the interesting thing was that very week that he came in was when he sold the rights. So I was like dying to ask him, but I didn't, as to what were you thinking? What's going on? What's going to happen to Star Wars? But, you know, I had to refrain because I was trying to be professional. I could see, though, he was very happy. He seemed very almost uplifted, that it was some sort of weight off his shoulders. And I could tell that that was something that was weighing heavily on him as a creator, as a writer, as a director. And to have just that feeling to be kind of not done with it, but just lift it off, you know, in other hands. I think that was it must have given him a big sigh of relief.
I think so.
And fans, I think, need to also remember, because it's very easy to get jaded, but like what I think an uncommon thing that is, you know, like a person could go either way with something that they have complete ownership of. And it could have been very easy for George to be like, no one's doing Star Wars besides me, I'm done, you know? And the idea that he understood, and you mentioned, Craig, about feeling a loyalty to this audience. And I think that is part of why Star Wars succeeds. There is the story, but there was real care put into respecting these fans and the people that loved these movies and cared about them. And we have seen many, I think, documentaries or series recently talk about how Star Wars, the merchandising changed the action figure world, you know, and just changed the levels. But I think one of the stories that doesn't get as much attention is exactly what is told in Craig's book, which is there was this same kind of evolution going on as Craig was talking about a little bit ago, with what a fan community is. And part of that is that we have some debt as fans to people like Craig, to people like George, for, I think, not being selfish and looking at these things and going, what would I have wanted if I'm on the other side, and approaching it that way instead of like, how can I make a cheap buck? And I think that is really what is felt here. I mean, even the fact that George donated half the money that he was paid for Star Wars, you know, by Disney. I mean, these are things that, yes, we can always go, hey, there's more people could have done, there's more all of us can do. But we should also acknowledge some of the really important things I think that people close to the creation of Star Wars have done.
I think, you know, you have to remember that Star Wars got made because when George and Gary were working on post-production for American Graffiti, they wanted to take a break and go see a movie. And they looked through the newspaper, and there wasn't any movie that they wanted to see. And they decided, well, let's make the kind of movie we want to go see. At first, they tried to get the rights to Flash Gordon, but Universal wouldn't make a deal for them, or wouldn't let them do that movie under them. So they went with, you know, this thing George had been working on for years, Star Wars. So it's all there because that's what they wanted to see.
You tapped into something here, Bryant, that stood out to me. Where the future goes for Star Wars, I'd like to know, all of you, where do you want to see going? What do you want to see going forward with the Star Wars franchise, whether it be films, comics, novels, gaming? What do you look forward to right now that the Skywalker saga is over, but you obviously want more. You're thirsty for more. What do you want?
Well, I think in answer to the question of do we want more books, movies, comics, the answer is just yes. So yes.
Anything and all of it.
All
Yeah.
of it. Yeah, I think that's what's so wonderful. I mean, in terms of there is so much rich history, not only with the movies themselves, but in the legacy stories now that because they are legacy creators mostly are now free to pick up those stories and adapt them and utilize some of the characters or plot points or themes from those stories into new stories for a new generation that may not have any idea that they existed in that format, whether it was books or comics, etc. So I think like anything, and I think like how George pulled from the tenets of storytelling with Joseph Campbell, I think that creators can now do with Star Wars. And there's so many distant planets and universes that can be visited within the Star Wars franchise. And I think that the sky or the stars would be more apt is the limit. So I think that sometimes, and as Craig said, some things are going to be better than others, but I think that's all in the eye of the beholder. I mean, I think that as long as these stories are tended to with care and that the genuineness and creative drive are put into these, that the intention is that they be enjoyed by generations of people to come, then I think we're in for a real treat.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I personally want to see more Disney Plus series. I'm all over The Mandalorian, and I can't wait for the next season. So I'd rather see that more, surprisingly, more than the films, because I think the films can take a little bit of a break, but let's see a little bit more of an episodic journey into Star Wars, maybe monthly or weekly at least. Brian, how about you?
I think that's it. It's a big universe. And you can, the Mandalorian isn't a character who was in any of the movies. You can do stories of other Jedis. You can do just rebellion stories. You can do all kinds of different things. And of course, other characters who existed in the universe who we just barely met. It's like in Solo. Yes, you could do a sequel to Solo if it had done better financially. I'm sure they would have. But personally, I thought, okay, the next Solo movie would just be, let's go on another caper. I'd rather have seen a Kira movie because she was a really interesting character. Where was she going to go? What was going to happen to her? You can do all those kinds of stories in that universe.
Brian, how about you?
I agree with both what Barbara and Craig said. I guess if I was going to be really specific, the real Star Wars geek in me would like to see what the MCU has done with some of these well-known titles that they've sort of taken that are known in like the comic book world, and sort of take that title and reimagine it for the MCU, like Age of Ultron and Civil War. I would love to see something where we reimagine Shadows of the Empire. I would love to see an animated film that takes place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and sort of reimagine some of the things that were created originally for Shadows of the Empire, and sort of connect the dots between those two films. See Luke gain some of his Jedi knowledge and deal with the repercussions of Empire. See Leia try to set up the path for rescuing Han, things like that. So I'd be really interested to see them do that with anything. It doesn't have to be Shadows of the Empire, but that would be my go-to.
Same here. I wish Shadows of the Empire would get a lot more attention. That was an amazing novel. Craig, I have to ask this question. You were on set. I already know the answer to this, but I had to hear it from your mouth. Who shot first, Han or Greedo? Go.
Well, I was not on set for that, but yes, I think we all know that Han shot first, without question. I used to pass out at science fiction conventions, badge ribbons that said Han shot first. It's like when Steven Spielberg re-edited E.T. and took out the rifles, and it's like, and even Steven has said, that was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that, and they changed it back and put the rifles back. I think this whole thing with, oh, Han shouldn't have shot first. He's a good guy. It's like, Han wasn't a good guy. He was a scoundrel.
A scoundrel, that's right.
He was a smuggler, and clearly this guy was about to kill him. So, I thought that changing it's a mistake. Changing it over and over and over again, I think, is a bigger mistake.
Well, I'm glad we heard it straight from the horse's mouth, or at least one of them. And if I ever get to see George again, I'm going to ask him again just to hear it straight from his mouth. Thank you guys for everything. Before we wrap up, where can folks find you, Bryant and Barbara?
Sure, you can find us at fanbasepress.com. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, everything except MySpace.
Craig, how about you? Where can folks find you?
Well, folks can, of course, buy my book, Star Wars Memories, which is available from Amazon or barnesandnoble.com. And I'm not so widespread on social media. I do have Instagram and Twitter accounts, but I don't do much with them. I'm mostly on Facebook under my name, and there's a Star Wars Memories Facebook page as well.
Everyone should purchase a copy right now.
Really great book. I was just about to do another praise on it. I'm maybe like a quarter to halfway through it, Craig, and it's just great to just. It really is. It's your memories. It means a lot to you, but it also means a lot to the fans. So we thank you for imparting that to us. Just a little bit of just a little capsule of what that was like to be there.
Well, thank you. I've been very, obviously everyone wants to write a book people like and hope that they do. I've been very fortunate in, no one has told me they didn't like it, and all of the reviews on Amazon, almost all of them are 5-star, and the last time I looked, there was one 4-star review because they didn't think the quality of photo reproduction was up to their standards. It's not an art book. There's lots of photos in it, but it's not designed to be an art book.
Yes.
Yeah. It's about the content, not what the outside looks like. You can find me on Instagram at Damien_DeCarlo, also Making a Geek _podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe and that little bell for more cool content on this channel. Until next time, everybody, keep calm and geek out, and may the force be with you. Good night, everybody.